What's up, bitches? So it's been a minute since I've done a true crime, let alone an ASMR true crime. So that's what I'm gonna do today. I'm just gonna keep the video going because my dog's being very disruptive tonight. So this true crime's a little. Go drink your water. This is a reminder. Go drink some water. So the story is, like I said, true crime, but like nobody was killed intentionally. This was more like an accident. So there was death, but no killers. So sorry to disappoint any of you. But I got my show notes here because I cannot memorize 6 pages of lines. I know the story, I don't know the details, so bear with me. I also don't have a teleprompter, so this will have to do. I'm going to try to make this a little higher. There we go. So this is going to take place in 1955. So we're going to be talking about the 1955 Le Mans disaster. Le Mans. I don't know if I'm saying that right. It's a French word. It's spelled Le Mans, but you're supposed to pronounce it Le Mans. So on June 11th, so in June 11th, 1955, at the Le Mans race in northwestern France, it is a beautiful spring day. It's an endurance race. So it's basically who can put on the most mileage. There's families there, they're dancing, they're playing games, carnival, rides. Not rides, just games. There's even a strip show. They got it all. The drivers were some of the most famous of the time. Guys like Sterling Moss, Juan Miguel, Fangio, Mike Hawthorne. And I'm going to say this now. I'm probably going to pronounce a lot of things wrong. And if I do, I'm so sorry. And then you have the cars that they're driving, which are Mercedes, Aston Martin, Ferrari, Jaguar, stuff like that. So this race is a big deal. A lot of people are watching it every year. It's just getting better. The cars are being more innovative, so that when they win, they could be like, "Oh, it's because of my brakes were so amazing," etc. So it's a great year. All the drivers are very well known by everybody. And you gotta remember that it is 1955. Europe is 10 years out from World War II. So a lot has, a lot of change has happened. Like I said, a lot of people are watching the race. It's probably around like 300,000 people that are watching. One person in particular, his name is Jacques Roulet. I really hope I'm pronouncing that right. Jacques. Okay, I'm gonna call him Jacques. He's a French man. He's an inspiring competitive driver. So he's been to the Le Mans race before. He knows how to get a good spot, when you go to a rave with your friends and they're like, "Follow me," and they're just like elbows deep, like he's the guy you want in the front of the line, all right? So basically, Jock and his friends, they can't get good seats, so they go to the standing area, which is super close to the track. Jock dreams of being on the track and competing one day. And just so you guys know about the Le Mans race, it's considered one of the most brutal races in the world. It's an endurance race that lasts 24 hours. Drivers need to be in really good health. They need to think fast, as well as going over 150 miles per hour without seatbelts or roofs. It's not about speed, but the cars and the driver's ability. As dangerous as it is, no one knew exactly how tragic that nobody knew that Le Mans would be labeled that night as the deadliest auto race in history. I could not talk for a second. I'm so sorry. So let's talk about Jacques. So Jacques is born in Normandy, France in 1936 to a family of dairy farmers. Jacques went through a lot. He went through a lot in World War II. Comes the Nazis and invade and occupy most of France while he's a baby at this time. And he's left with emotional scars. This part of his life is very violent and chaotic. When he's 8, he watched his friend, who he was just playing with, in the fields near his home. His friend steps on a landmine. 2 years later, he witnesses the D-Day invasion of Normandy. Jacques and his family watch as a wall of Allied ships move in and have troops storm French beaches to push back the Nazis. As fire begins, the family leave their home, and he says, quote, "We climbed into a wagon. We didn't have to tell the horse to go. He was flying." Jacques ends up at a 500, like him and his family end up at a 500-year-old house slightly inland, and no one, and at one point, a group of Germans invade this place. Nazis make his grandmother cook for them. It's just a whole thing. But within minutes of them arriving, British bombers swarm the skies. Jacques and his family sprint to a bunker to take cover. But Roulet is pushed out by Germans, who obviously want to hide out. So the family runs back to the old home and hold out until the bombing is over. Jacques is relieved when it's over because all his family miraculously survived. Every bomb missed the farmhouse, but carnaged everywhere else around them. Jacques said, quote, "The next morning I walked through the fields and I found one German with half his face blown off. Bunker was tarnished." He grows up fast. Before he's 10, he delivers messages for the French resistance all over Normandy. And even though he was searched a bunch of times, they never caught him. Once the war ends, he gravitates towards auto racing. In 1948, when he's 12, his grandfather takes him to his first Grand Prix race, and he loses his fucking mind. He's too young to drive, obviously, so at the time, he starts, collecting, miniature cars and, racing posters. In his teens, a doctor recommends him to quit, so the money that he would spend on cigarettes, he basically used it to expand his collection, his racing memorabilia. But his passion to be a race car driver, it's super strong. In 1952, he's only 16, and in France, you have to be 18. So what does any normal teenager do? He gets a fake license, he's down with it. When he's able to legally drive, he goes all in. The day after his 18th birthday, he competes in his first race. Not too long, he's traveling the continent to race, or he watches races as a spectator. And this is how he ends up at the 1911 Le Mans race. They lead up to the event that has been tragic. It's been tragic even just leading up to the event. Just a few weeks before, Ferrari's top driver is killed in Italy during a race, and days before the race, the son of a Jaguar executive dies in a car crash while heading to France. And in Le Mans, during the practice session, the driver Shirley Moss loses control over his car and almost kills 2 reporters that were on the sidelines. Reporters suffer near fatal injuries but live. Competitors feel uneasy about the circuit itself. There's a stretch along the pits that's very short and narrow. Some reports say it's only 10 feet wide, and that's basically a single car lane in America. It's also the area to fuel and change tires, etc. It's very chaotic. There's a lot going on. The head of the Mercedes racing team, he tells the race's organizers, quote, "I'm a little bit scared. Just imagine a driver realizes a fraction of a second too late and he's been told by a team manager to slow down," quote. Drivers tend to brake suddenly on a narrow track like this and can have disastrous consequences. But the organizers really don't give a fuck. They wave this off because they insist that the track has been around since the 1920s and is safe. There hasn't been any major injuries. But they are overlooking some key points. Cars were a lot faster now. Jock isn't aware of the danger in front of him. Mike Hawthorne, driving for Jaguar, he's there to beat Mercedes because it's the team to beat that event, but also is a German company, and Mike hasn't forgotten the loved ones that he lost during the war. So stakes are enormously high. So the race begins around 4. Many drivers pushing the limits. Mike, who focused beating Mercedes, is gunning it. Sports Illustrated describes his driving, quote, "hard and almost brutal." Hawthorne's idea to push his Jaguar is risky, but it's working, and he's setting lap records. 3 hours passed. There's 21 hours left. Jock sees Hawthorne flying toward him, the narrow straight directly in front of him. A few other drivers are approaching as well, including Lance Macklin, I think that's driving for Austin Healey, and Pierre Levesque driving for Mercedes. The next moment is the moment that changes everything, and it happens in milliseconds. Hawthorne, who's almost flown past the grandstand, is in the narrow section of the track where he realizes he's being called out into the pits to refuel. And he can't miss this fuel break because there's not going to be a next one till a minute, he can't miss it. So he brakes, he cuts across the lanes, and he pulls his car over to the pit. This catches Lance by surprise, who is behind him. Lance doesn't have the same braking power that's needed, so he's forced to sharply turn off the track to miss Hawthorne's car, but he's going over 100 miles per hour. So he swerves right back into the course, and this puts him directly in front of Pierre Levesque, who's going about 150 miles per hour, and he has no time to react. Jock, at this time, asks his friend that's standing next to him to borrow his binoculars, but before his friend can even give them off his neck, Jock hears a loud bang. Levesque's front right tire goes over the back of Lance's car, and it's launched into the air. In his last living act, Levesque signals the driver behind him to warn him that there's danger ahead. That driver is Juan Miguel Fangio, who later says, quote, "He was about to be killed, but he saved my life." Sorry, that shit just makes me cry every time. And he had no time to react, and his first thought that came to his mind was helping the other person. 49-year-old Pierre Levesque is thrown from his car and hits the track and dies instantly. His airborne Mercedes flies into the grandstands and explodes. A journalist named Benji Gunhart, I hope I say it, describes the hood of Levesque's car like, quote, "A hood of Levesque's car quote, sorry, a terrible automobile guillotine. Reporter Brad Spungai said, quote, the hood spun around like a disc through a packed group of spectators, decapitating, I think I'm saying that, dozens of people. The Associated Press covered in 1955 reports the screams of the dying were drowned out by the roars by the powerful cars still racing down the straightaway. So imagine this happened and the cars are still racing. The race is still fucking going on, guys. Oh, I'm not done yet. So while this is happening, the race continues. After the bang, the last thing Jock remembers is lying on the ground. He looks up and he sees his friend with no head, and his binoculars are still like attached to his neck. Jock says, quote, after a few seconds, I got up and I could not see anything from my left eye. A piece of human brain covered the left side of my glasses. I had a piece of scalp on my neck. When I saw the blood on my hands, I began to go into shock. A total of 120 people were injured. 84 people were killed, including Pierre Levesque. Levesque's American teammate John Finch was standing right next to his wife while all this happened, and they watched it happen together. He lobbies for the race to be called off, but they refuse. Some parts of the track, people don't even know what just happened and what's going on. They argue that spreading news will make people panic and the ambulance won't be able to reach the victims. But many people pointed out that the race could have been canceled. Later on throughout the night, it starts to die down. They would have been able to get the ambulance through, basically. Organizers won't budge. Finch goes to Mercedes team leaders to withdraw on principle. The very least, they argue it's just a PR nightmare. Just 10 hours after the war, a German piece of machinery is responsible for a gruesome death on French soil. So Mercedes agrees and withdraws, even though its car is so far best in show. They don't compete at the Le Mans for another 30 years. Jock notices his shirt is drenched and with blood, and he throws it on the ground. His friends are dead, and he walks past dozens of corpses, saying, quote, I could not speak. It took 3 hours to get my voice, quote. He finds a phone booth to call his family to let them know he's okay, but so many other people already reached the phone booth, and they're trying to call their loved ones as well. So he basically walks home. When he walks in, his grandfather screams, you're not dead. Jock's mother already put a candle out for him and a crucifix with a picture as a memorial. So basically his friend was at the race, saw his shirt, and called his family when he saw it. This tragedy is called, quote, the accident that changed everything. Multiple countries in Europe immediately banned motorsports until safety improvements. Switzerland holds out the longest and doesn't lift their ban until 2022. There's a newfound focus on safety, and Le Mans builds, and many drivers retire, which I don't blame them, including American driver John Finch. But it never leaves his mind, and because of this, he invents the Finch barrier, which are basically those like big barrels barrows that you see on the side of the roads that are like filled with sand. He made those so people like swerve or crash, they could plunge into that. It'd be a lot safer. It's like a cushion. People try to blame Mike Hawthorne, but he's cleared of wrongdoing by investigators. It's basically the track's fault. He's haunted with this for the rest of his life. He's forced to keep driving. He was forced that day to keep driving. Like, imagine this tragedy happened and you were told to not stop. and he won the race for Jaguar. And they take his pick, and while they're taking his pick, he sipped champagne. And so basically the French newspapers took this and put it in the paper and said, "To your health, Mr. Hawthorne." In 1959, Mike Hawthorne was killed on a civilian road in his Jaguar trying to pass up a Mercedes. Don't tell me that's not a fucking coincidence. He was only 29 fucking years old. Later asked about Jacques' survival, he says, "It was a close call, but it was not my time. It's not time for me." He goes on to a promising racing career, but he suffers a lot of injuries. In 1959, he returns to Le Mans as a competitor, but the car gives out as he goes, and he goes back 2 years later and finishes. He moves to the USA and ends up in Georgia at a dairy plant and continues racing and his collection for racing memorabilia. He goes to and later goes to Chicago waiting tables. A Chicago Tribune journalist, Kay Learning, seats in his section, and she's charmed by him so much that she writes an article saying, quote, "His heart belongs to a sports car." It says in it, quote, "Being a waiter is not his profession, he tells you, and that's too bad for many of us. He's such a good one. So pleasant and so unintrusively attentive, with an infectious kind of John Davy that makes good food taste better." In the early 70s, he moves to Dallas, Texas to work with a wine company, and then he retires racing, 34 years old. But like most people do when they say they're going to retire, they don't. So a few years later, he's restoring a vintage race car. He drops out of the wine business and he sells his collection because it was very unique. In 2007, he's 71 and he takes part in the endurance race for Paris to Beijing and drops out after 4 days because he fractured his foot during the drive. His long trip home to Dallas, he's rushed to the hospital and his appendix almost burst. He's 20 pounds lighter now and he has no regrets. He said, quote, "I saw things I had not imagined. It was absolutely beautiful." 2 years later, he raced in another from Beijing to Bombay near Mount Everest, which reached 16 feet in elevation. I think it was 16,000. 2011, at 75 years old, he's does another race from Lima, Peru to Buenos Aires, Argentina. And then 2014, Jacques dies at the home of 78 years old of natural causes. Dallas Magazine writes, "As a boy growing up in France during World War II, he came too close to bombings as a European race car driver. He endured too many accidents as a spectator during the worst racing accident in history. He survived against too many odds to walk away unscarred, yet he did. Jacques himself could never explain his good fortune. He once said, quote, "He had some very close calls, but I believe there's a good star shining down on me." And that is the story of the Le Mans disaster crash of 1955. Which, I don't know about you guys, but that's fucking wild. I never heard of that race. One of the deadliest. I mean, I'm not into like cars or racing or anything like that, but to every time I need to say that word, to decapitate, I don't even know how many people it decapitated, but it was a good amount. Like 84 people died at a race. Like, that's wild. That's sad. Like, there was kids, like there was everybody there. Grandmas, grandpas, moms, dads, brothers, sisters. Heavy. Well, hope you guys enjoyed this story. Hope you guys are doing good and well, and thanks for watching. Bye.